Today I'm going to show you guys how I produced a song using only Heaviosity's virtual instruments. Let's get going. Have you ever wondered how your favorite bands get this pro sound? Well, a big part of the production process now is regarding production samples that are added to the band's core sound. If you're talking about rock and metal genres, basically on top of bass, guitar, drums and vocals, bands now use a lot of samples to enhance the band's sound, and sometimes it's not necessarily a feature, but you can definitely feel it inside the mix. There's this density, there's this momentum, there's this build-up. So the producer's job is to first put himself into context. What's the song talking about? What's the story here? And how can I make it better, basically? So the number one goal as a producer is going to be to emphasize the emotional impact of the song. So when you're dealing a lot with musicians, sometimes they tend to forget that. So as a producer, the goal is to create the best song possible to connect with a listener. If the song is sad, well, you're going to have to work towards that. If the song is heavy, dark, and a bit crazy like this one, I'm going to have to work towards that. So every little decision I'm going to make is going to be to go towards that goal. So the second goal is going to be to smoothen the transitions. So imagine if we're telling a story and we're missing words here and there or a paragraph, it's going to sound a bit weird. So in this case, the samplers and all the samples I'm going to be working on are trying to add to this to make sure all the transitions are seamless, doesn't matter which part of the song. My third goal here is going to be to add impact to the song. We want it to be memorable and we want to make sure the hook is as strong as it can be. Also, when we do those transitions, when we land on the next section, there's stuff we can do to try to help the momentum and create energy. So for example, I'm going to use reverse cymbal hits and then metallic hits on the downbeat. Fourth goal is tied to the two previous goals, is going to be to create movement. So for example, in slow parts, we don't want it dragging, so we can use psychoacoustics techniques to try to add movement, for example, in shaker 8 notes on top of a basic rock beat on 2 and 4s with the snare. So we're trying to create an illusion of movement even though things may be slow. Another example of that is in the bridge part, I'm using shakers in 16th note before an actual kick drum part comes in 16th note. So it slowly brings in new elements in the song and it makes it again very seamless while bringing the energy level higher. So summing everything up, my fifth goal is going to be to help create that story. Make sure all the pieces fit together, and then all the production samples I will be working on are a means to an end, meaning that story has to be told in the most perfect way possible. So working production samples, there are two ways to approach things. First would be to have the samples in your face, very obvious as a feature. And the second way would be more working psychoacoustics, meaning that you can feel the samples more than you can actually hear it. Meaning that if you're playing the full song and you mute this production sample bus, you're gonna feel something's missing, but when you put it back on, you won't necessarily perceive the sounds. So we're gonna work with both tangents today. So even though production samples is not necessarily the foundations of my mix here, in modern rock and metal productions, you need more than drums, bass, guitars, and vocals to achieve that pro sound. And all these production samples, even though sometimes you don't necessarily hear it, I can guarantee you there's a lot of them in almost all the records you're listening to. In this project, I subdivided my production samples into two different sub-buses. First one is percussive samples, and second one is tonal samples or melodic. So the reason why I did that is to be able to have more control over the two buses, especially considering the drums are very, very powerful and very loud in the mix. So I don't want to have the percussion samples to be competing with my drums. And I want a bit better control over the transient on that bus. So they're being treated slightly differently. So let's listen to the intro and see what kind of samples we have there. So here I have rendered some samples from Gravity, which are tonal samples, a bit eerie, samples that I'm bringing later on during the song and that are being reused and with automation. So basically the levels are changing a little bit, but it's recurrent inside the song. So it creates also this sense of symmetry. Let's listen to it. as you can see here, there are a bunch of tracks. And the reason why I loaded multiple instances of Kontakt rather than loading just one is to have full control over all the parameters of the samples, so I can have full recall and be able to get back to them and change them as I want. For example, here the distortion setting was a bit different, and also we can work the EQ, the filters, to make sure that the samples blend in as much as possible. Also, you're going to save DSP by fixing stuff inside your damage engine or your sampler's engine rather than printing and putting effects after that on your channel. So let's listen only to the sampler bus in the intro to show you how it's progressing. First verse comes in with full band. So the first eerie sounding synthesizer you hear is from Gravity. It's been rendered already. And then all these percussion sounds, they come from Damage 2, from the loop designer basically. The goal here is to try to immerse the listener as soon as possible to bring it into the band's world. So here my goal is really also to work on a seamless transition by using these reverse cymbals as well as these hits. So by using the Klang Heaper sample here from Damage 2, I'm really making the snare drum sound larger than life and give this industrial dark vibe to it as well. As soon as the second part of the verse kicks in here, we have this really cool loop that kicks in, which is called Fury Max. Let's listen to it in solo so you hear what's going on. So depending on how you set those boundaries in the loop, you can use just a part of it or the full loop. It depends what fits the song better. In this case, I use the full thing. And also in the effects section, I distorted the crap out of it. So it's very, very intense, but also it's controlling the transients in a nice way. You see also there's saturation here, compression, and a cutoff as the filter section. So next up here is verse 1B. Nothing fancy here, but since we have this slow beat in the first part of the verse, I tried to add some momentum here to bring us towards the chorus. So I simply added a shaker with a little bit of reverb, room reverb sound. So it sounds like this. And with the full band. Nothing fancy here, but if you actually remove it, you can feel it's a bit more dragging the part. So next up here is the first chorus. It has to be catchy, it has to be memorable, the energy level has to be higher. So here, not only I added some percussion samples, but I also added some melody with mosaic leads, which is right here, to bring more information in the low-mid region of the mix. So let's listen to it in solo. Okay, coupled with Gravity 2. And we add on top of this the rhythmic pattern with Damage 2. Okay, here we go. So there's this kind of ostinato going on with the Slam It Shot sample here, which is pretty cool. This loop is very, very nice. So let's listen to the full band to see the effect that it creates on the mix. So again, here the goal is not to steal the show. The goal is simply to bring the energy level higher, so it helps bring some movement inside the mix. So let's listen with the sampler bus just a bit louder. Okay, let's go to the next section here, which is the bridge part. So there's a long break, and this part is kind of eerie. Basically, it's talking about a maniacal killer that's supposed to go and murder a bunch of people. So again, my goal is to emphasize that, and you're gonna see it here with the gravity samples that I'm using down there. Very, very cool. So let's listen to the samples in solo. With the full band. Okay, so again, it's bringing a bit this eerie feeling forward, and then we transition to this crazy speed metal part. So again, you're gonna hear a reverse gong, a reverse cymbal, and then it hits on the downbeat to propel the next part. So here we have this sample called Blowback, and it's pretty loud in the mix. The goal is really to propel the next part, but we have to be very careful using this type of big sound because it can really compete against drums and bass and destroy or obstruct your low end. So you have to control here, and we have a filter part to control that, EQ part. It's also heavily distorted. So the goal is to control the transient a little bit, control the low end, make sure that you can perceive it. So again, the best way is really to not necessarily EQ it or treat it in solo, but treat it inside the context of the mix to make sure it doesn't overpower the other elements. So this B part of the bridge is already pretty intense. We don't necessarily need to add anything on top. The band sound and all the intensity, there's already a ton of information in there. You don't want to add on top of that. But the next part is going to be a return to a slow beat with a 4 on the floor beat on the drums. So what we can do here to trick the listener is to keep this energy or this movement. Again, I'm adding the shaker while the beat is playing. So that way you keep the forward movement of the song even though the beat is switching for something much slower. So let's listen to the whole part and see what it's doing here. Okay, so this is pretty interesting how this section was built. So basically there's this transition, then there's this additional information in the 16th note, and as soon as the kick drum hits its 16th notes, then we don't need those shakers anymore, so they disappear. With the band. So basically it creates this seamless transition, which is very, very interesting. Then we have the guitar solo, obviously. Again, those loops to help create some movement when the band's slowing down. So since we want the momentum in the song to always build from the beginning of the song until the end, this last chorus has more samples, more layers, and we have this eerie thing that's recurrent in the song right there. Let's listen to it first. It's Mosaic leads here, and we have our gravity, it's already rendered. And listen to the whole band. Those samplers are really helping the ending of the song, and if I actually mute the sampler bus, you're gonna really miss it. So this is a sign that all the samples have a reason to be there. Obviously, it takes a lot of time to be able to work on them, find what works, find what doesn't work. For example, in this lead patch, this came from a preset, but obviously it's been changed. Why? It's because I heard some percussive things that were not fitting the song very well, for example, and I changed those. Also, I changed the envelope inside the control section of it so that it doesn't work against the drums. In this specific case, I did not want any transient information. I only wanted sustain and decay. So that's basically how I reworked the part. Again, you have to put it into context and understand what suits the song to its best. So to sum things up, make sure that every little decision you're making and sample that you're adding is to help the song, because sometimes less is more. Always remember the big picture, and remember that the foundation is having a good song. These production samples are just the cherry on top of the sundae to add to something that's already good and make it better. Thank you so much for watching the video. Let me know in the comments below which one was your favorite library from Heaviosity here.